going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories, and we are continuing our run-through, if you will, of the Innistrad Midnight Hunt stories. Last week, if you missed it, right up there, you can click and watch our first of these many myriad of reviews, where we reviewed the first main story. And this week we are here for the first side story, because if you missed last week or you don't recall, we are going to review them in the order that they have been released. So that means next week we will be back with main story number 2, just so that everyone is aware of the order that we're doing these things in. And yes, as we mentioned last week, we are going to be doing them over time, even though they released 3 stories in the first week, and then it'll be 2 every week thereafter. We're going to take our sweet time, because we know that when these stories are over, we're going to have months to just sit here and wait around twiddling our thumbs, so we might as well take the time and give these stories the time that they deserve. So, tonight, whenever you happen to be watching this, thank you for joining us, and please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. But we are here for, as I said, side story number 1, Tangles by Shonen Maguire. And so, my quick review at the top of this one, I enjoyed this one. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as you did, so I'll let you kind of gush a little bit more. But I would say I enjoyed it. I think you should take the time to read it. It had 2 planeswalkers in it as characters, and so to know the story, you should definitely read up on them. But Amy, what about you? What did you think of this story?
Yeah, this was my shit right here. Person very sort of intertwined with nature itself and trees, and sensing into the energies of the mana in a way that somebody like Teferi was unable to do. So, yeah. Very cool. Give it a read for sure. Yeah.
And so to remove as many barriers as possible for you, if for some reason you are unaware of where to find these stories, if you look down below, the top link in the description will take you to this story so that you can read it for yourself. And then after you are done, if you have not read it yet, we would love it if you would come back here and join us for this review, either just to hear what we have to say, or more importantly, and more to what we would love to see, is for you all to join in on that discussion as well. But, as I said, on to the full review itself. We start with, and in fact, the story was called Tangles, right? And the like thumbnail for the story was of Renin 7. Renin 6, Renin 7. I have mixed up the arts in my own head at this point, but it was Ren and one of the trees. And it starts with Ren talking about her needing to say farewell to 6, because 6 made his choice in wanting to return to the forest and stop being
his forest.
Right, and stop being part of this relationship. And so she was going to be allowing 6 to go back to the soil, if you will, and was going to then start looking for 7. I will admit, Renin 6 was, I may even be talking out my ass here, but I believe Renin 6 was part of Modern Horizons 1, and to my knowledge, I'm relatively confident that Modern Horizons 2 did not have official stories. And so, with that being said, I do not know if there are any other stories that have been written regarding Renin 6, Renin 7, Ren and as a planeswalker. And if so, if there have not been, then this, to my knowledge, is the first story ever written about Ren and whomever as a planeswalker. And so there was a lot that we learned in this story about Ren and 6, Ren and 7, or Ren as a Dryad planeswalker, because where else would we have learned it except possibly flavor text from Modern Horizons or what have you?
Yeah.
I don't want to, I guess I don't want to jump around too much, but I want to talk about Ren a lot here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Ren and 6 or even Ren and 7 are somewhat well known, like to a point, despite not having a story to back that up.
That's because the original Ren and 6 were very good and very expensive. And so the card itself was renowned for its priciness. There was a banning, or at least there were...
notorious, is what you say.
That's not wrong. There was either a ban or an immediate call for a ban, or a little bit of both. And with regards to this, you can tell that how much we play Modern. But yeah, it was definitely a bit crazy how good that card was.
Well, not gonna lie, after reading this story, I agree that Ren and either 6 or 7 or whatever future tree she ends up partnering up with, if you will, is incredibly powerful.
Right. And
from a flavor standpoint.
Right. Well, and that's why I think it's good that this story was as good as it was for Ren's introductory story as a Planeswalker, because if it wasn't, and yet it was such an impactful card, I feel like it would have disenfranchised some folks who wanted to see a card like Ren and 6 that was very popular for its abilities and its playability to actually translate well to a story or to the realm of a Vorthos player as well.
Right.
And
even if it's not in the ways that they expected or would have wanted it to be,
right.
I do think you could say that these characters are powerful, and you want to have that to kind of relate back to the powerful card.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting to me, right? We've discussed on this channel, the last time we were on Innistrad, we read the Gisa and Geralf story of games. One of our favorite stories that we've ever read. It was just very good. We read it with friends as well, which also helps for the nostalgia factor of it. But still, I still just think it was a great story.
Yeah.
Well,
and that had a lot to do with the way in which it was written.
Amazingly well. By Alison Lures, if I recall correctly. So
really?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh. Okay.
I think so. And if so, if it was not Alison, then I apologize to the person that did write it. But if it was Alison, as always, Alison, amazing job.
But that was the one that was written, like, in letters to each other?
Which was phenomenal. Such an interesting way of writing a story.
Memorable at the very least.
Yes.
Because if I remembered it this far back, then it was memorable.
Right.
Because I don't remember anything like that.
Right.
I suck with remembering stuff like that.
But the reason that I bring it up is because with that story, any other depictions of them in story form, the outcry from the player base was, cool, where's their card?
Right.
Right? And so then they get a card, or now multiple cards, depicting them together, individually, whatever the case may be. And so people were excited because they enjoyed the stories with these characters. And this is now an example of it being the other way around. That it was a card first, and an impactful one at that, and now it has a good story to go along with it as well.
Well, I feel like that's kind of the way it is most of the time, right? Is like there are these cards that are, cool in whatever way they're cool, and then possibly like there's a subset of people who are like, oh, well, we want there to be a cool story in association with that. And I feel like the other way of these stories are so cool, like why aren't they cards, is a lot more rare.
I honestly don't know that that's true.
Really?
With older stuff, right? With the novels, like older novels and stuff, realize that a lot of those characters that were named in those novels, again, not as similar to what we have today, but we talk about it even today, that some of the stories that are written today were, or within the past 2 years or so, let's say, the stories have been rather removed from the card production or the R&D card creation and the mechanics and etc.
There was a fair like bit of detachment between those two things.
Right. And so with that, a lot of the older stories were just written to be written, and all these characters were made. And so there's been a big push recently, especially with commander sets coming out and reprint sets or homage sets such as Modern Horizons, etc. You're seeing a lot of these characters that were mentioned in flavor text on other cards, in novels, etc., getting their own card versions now. So that's a really interesting question, though. So I think that might be a better question to pose to all of you, is what do you think about that dichotomy? Do you think, because I don't think there's a right answer here unless people actually want to go and do this research, which seems a little much to me, but more power to you.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, if you've got the time and the willingness, I suppose.
I don't think it's possible. I truly don't. And that's not a challenge. I mean, if you do it, amazing. But I don't know if it's possible. But what's that breakdown look like? What characters were cards first that there was a clamoring for them to be in stories? And what characters were characters first in stories, whether they be novel, like long form or short form, and then people clamored for them to be in card form? I'm curious because I don't know that I buy what you're saying that one is more rare than the other. I feel like nowadays they're more balanced.
Okay.
Whereas previously, in like years past, like 5-10 years ago, it would have definitely been that it was more weighed towards they exist in story and people want them in cards. Is much more prevalent than they're in cards and people want stories about them. I could be wrong, but I feel like that's where I would lean if we were talking about the past. Now that we're in modern day, I think it may have balanced out a little bit more.
Okay.
Maybe. But again, that's a question for all of you. Let's talk about the beginning, like paragraph or two was from Ren's perspective, and then again, partially Six's perspective as well. And then we switch over to Teferi, which again, the thumbnail was of Ren and 6 or Ren and 7, and the story was called Tangles, so I did not expect Teferi to be in this story. I hadn't looked up any spoilers or anything like that, so when the paragraph changed over, right, there was that dividing line after Ren's section, and then it talks about Teferi. I was like, okay, I mean, I knew Teferi was in the set, obviously, but I didn't expect this particular story, especially being a side story, to contain our first introduction to Teferi for this set and these stories.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, absolutely. But, so we were talking about the things that we learned about Ren Plus, and talked about the fact that she is a dryad. She can insert herself into these trees, remove herself from these trees, which Teferi mentions is outside of the norm for what he knows of dryads, that they are born in a tree, that's their tree, and then they die, right? Like they live their lives and then that's their life ends.
Right. But and they're forever with the one tree.
Correct. Ren mentions the story of a fire that burned in her home, or through her home, and she was able to contain that fire within herself so that it did not burn the surrounding trees and dryads and whatever around her. And in doing so, that fire is still contained within her. She didn't absorb it and then snuff it. It still exists. And so every new tree that she bonds with, that she partners with, has to be able to contain that fire. That's like one of the rules of her abilities.
Okay. And that's why she needs to switch trees, is because they get to a point where they can't handle that fire anymore, and then she's gotta find new ones.
Right, and she even mentions, I think she said 4, when she left 4. 4 was badly injured in a fight of some kind, and she needed to leave 4 because 4 was essentially dying. Whereas with 6, she said, it was harder to leave 6 because 6 could have continued on, but asked to be let go.
Right.
Which is pretty interesting to me. I think that's cool.
Yeah, and it's cool, like, the partnership that she has with these trees. So, and it's weird because you don't really expect it when she's calling them just a number, essentially.
Yeah.
But the relationship that she has with them is that they can say, look, I don't want to travel the multiverse anymore. I want to go back to my wood that I'm from. And... Or at least that this one felt.
Right.
That he could. In the relationship that they had.
Right. I also find it... Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I also find it super interesting that Ren's point... something that Ren said was she's on a plane, she gets a new tree on that plane, and then travels the multiverse with it, and then leaves those trees on other planes.
Oh.
When she leaves the trees. She said that to Teferi, like sometimes she just leaves them on unknown planes to that tree.
Oh,
not necessarily every time, right? I believe 6 here was returned to around the area where she found 6.
Yeah.
But
well, the implication that I got was that 6 was the only one that was able to say, look, I want to go home and live out the rest of my life there, and that the others basically were dying.
I don't know, because she made it seem like she took the trees and traveled with them and let them see the planes.
Yeah.
And then left them on other planes. Like, which, if they're dying, I guess that's one thing, but like leaving a tree on another plane seems like it could be very dangerous. Maybe I'm...
Dangerous or awesome? Because, like, think about, like...
both?
Well, think about Zendikar, right? When we just went back to Zendikar, and the vampire, I don't know his name, was...
That was not from Zendikar Rising.
Oh,
the vampire...
Was from the original
that was from...
Zendikar.
No, there are 3 Zendikars. So we just reviewed Battle for Zendikar, which was the second traveling to Zendikar.
Right.
That's what you're referring to, where the vampire gave Nissa the seeds and said, these are the last remaining seeds, take them. So, sorry, go ahead.
Right, but what he wanted was for her to plant them on other planes. Not because he assumed those trees were already trees that were indigenous to those planes as well, but because he wanted to give a piece of Zendikar to planes that could survive when Zendikar could not.
Right, but that was an emergency situation. I don't think that was like a... that was a Zendikar's gonna go away.
No, I understand.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, like, I think it's really cool that Ren sort of leaving that dying tree behind on a different plane than one that it would normally grow on could make it so that that becomes a species of tree that grows on that plane after that point.
It's very interesting to me that you think that's cool. To me, the only thing I think of is what happens when you insert an animal that's not native to a particular area to an area, and it disrupts the entire ecosystem of that area. How the hell can you do that? How can you take a tree that's not native to a plane and then set it into a forest of another plane and think that that's okay all the time? Maybe she has dryad abilities that lets her know that, like, this is gonna be okay, because she can talk to the tree that she's partnered with, so she knows that, like, Oh, okay, because there was discussion that Teferi, I think it was Teferi, made of the fact that like oaks and elms are just things on all the planes, but it still seems super reckless to me. I mean, maybe I just don't understand environmentalism enough, but that seems I would never be comfortable doing that.
Well, I think with something like an animal, I think that can affect an ecosystem in a lot more ways negatively than plants can.
Sure, I guess
That's
right, and I guess maybe I'm thinking of something different, right? Because if you like transplant a plant, one, if it can't survive in that climate, then it probably just dies, and
right.
nothing around it is really affected, unless the like rotting wood attracts animals, and then those animals like live in the wood and then get sick from it or something.
Yeah, but I mean that's kind of more.
It's
like
a bit of a stretch.
A disease type of thing.
Sure.
Than it is a location type of thing.
Sure, and maybe I'm thinking more of like insects.
Okay.
Like insects that would be native to a tree.
I mean, if there are like insects living in the tree,
That's what I'm saying.
She
Absolutely.
leaves it behind.
Yes.
Or they've laid eggs inside of the tree,
Right.
and
they gestate, and
yeah.
that's probably more of what I'm concerned with. Which again, then it gets into the rules of like. More frequently recently, I feel like, there have been unique planeswalking rules and characters. So, like, JaAR and Mowu, right? Where Mowu is a statue of a dog when JaAR planeswalks.
Nice.
And then when they get to a new plane, Mowu is able to come out and be there, even though you can't really planeswalk with another living being. But then you had the rat situation with Kaya, where Kaya was able to phase rat inside of her and then planeswalk that way.
Yeah,
or
but that's just because she gets all ghostly.
What I'm saying is, this is another instance now with Ren, along with the Wanderer as well. The Wanderer doesn't planeswalk to places willingly. She planeswalks away from places willingly, if that makes sense. So she needs to keep moving, or I guess she chooses to stay on a plane willingly, as opposed to leave a plane willingly, is probably the better way to describe that. So now we have a new planeswalker in Ren and whomever, that it's another unique planeswalking rule for that particular planeswalker, in that Ren said that she cannot planeswalk if she is not bonded with a partner. Which, arguably, and maybe it will come up someday, but I doubt it. I'm not sitting here like, ooh, I can't wait for that story. But arguably, if she planeswalks to a plane that does not have a presence of trees, that she would not be able to, like, if her tree died, she would just be stuck there forever.
Probably.
And that kind of, it makes me think of Teo's plane that we learned about, where there's just diamond storms all the time, like sandstorms, but diamond storms all the time. Like, is that the whole plane, or is that like a portion of that plane, and if you were to travel, you would be able to find a forest there? Because if not, and Ren ever goes there, and like a diamond storm rips her tree to pieces, she could never leave.
Yeah. That sucks.
Right. But again, it's interesting implications about these rules, because two ways that this could go. They could either have written these rules which allows them a lot more leeway and free space to write about these things, but you also run into situations where you could write yourself into a corner. If they ever go back to Teo's plane, you kind of can't have Ren go there unless it's for a particular story reason, and then it could make a very compelling story for Ren to go there,
right.
Which is, if now that I'm here, I need to either leave immediately, or if there's a reason that I'm here, I need to make sure that I stay safe, because if my tree dies, I can never leave. And so that could be a super compelling story,
right.
But it could also mean that, like, if you want to have Ren and 8 or 9 or whoever be on this plane, you need to figure out, like, if you're like, you know what, the cards really are asking for a new printing of Ren. Well, if that's the case, your story team is either going to have to come up with a very compelling reason, or they're going to be really frustrated that they have to, like, try to write themselves out of this corner, which kind of sucks. But anyway, we've moved away from this story a bit, so I apologize. It's just that we're learning about Ren, and this is a new Planeswalker at this point, right? It's not a new, like, it's the second printing of this Planeswalker, but I liked the subtle nod where Ren mentions that 6 was very good to her, very powerful for her. And she says to 6, when she leaves 6, she says, my offspring, or not my offspring, your offspring, I'm going to come back here when I need 8. And I'm going to see you, old friend, and I'm going to look to your offspring, and I'm going to offer them the same offer that I offered you, because I know that you were quite powerful for me. And I think that's interesting because Renin 6 was printed into a modern format, aka a more eternal format, as opposed to Renin 7, which is being printed into a standard format. And standard is supposed to be a less powerful option than modern. It's got more limits to the card pool that's available to you. So arguably, this one is supposed to be less powerful than the original that was printed, which was printed directly into modern. So I liked that nod to pointing out to 6, like, you were great, your offspring, I'm going to offer them the same thing because I know how good you were.
Right.
And it also makes sense then that, unlike all the other Planeswalkers who, you know, there's like 15 Lilianas and Jaces, right? And they all have different abilities. Some of them are similar to one another. Like one Liliana ability causing you to discard and another Liliana ability causing both of you to discard. You know what I mean? Like, it's similar. But the Ren Planeswalker has a lot more ability to have more reasoning behind the different abilities that she has. Because now she can have, okay, well, this is Renin 6, so of course these are the abilities of Renin 6, but this is Renin 7, so now they have different abilities as opposed to Renin 6s, which, again, kind of makes sense.
What you were talking about before, though,
Sure.
I wanted to say, I think it's interesting that you brought that point up, that there's all these different, like, nuances for the different Planeswalkers, because maybe what we're going to come to find out is that that has something to do with the, whatchamacallit?
Mending?
Yes.
That's
like,
very interesting.
The nuances are the ways in which the sort of unlimited power became limited.
Okay.
You know?
I like that, yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about the mending towards the end as well.
Okay.
But yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. There was, again, whether it is subtle or whether it was meant to be right there in your face, there was a discussion of pronouns in the beginning as well, which I appreciated, seeing that it was done in I thought, a good way, right, in my opinion. Because it was Ren discussing 6 and saying that 6, while trees or tree folk, or no, trees and tree folk typically don't have genders, but dryads do. And so when 6 joined with Ren, he chose his pronouns of he, him. And she had her pronouns of she, her. And when they were together in the story, it was written as they, them, or their. And I thought that was great. I appreciated that it was very clear, right? It made perfect sense to me. And so I liked that discussion was able to be had in that way in the story, especially when these stories in the past have not necessarily been as friendly towards LGBT discussions that even just that is a cool step in the right direction, or towards the correct direction.
Okay.
Something else that I found interesting when we get to Teferi coming in, the Cathars show up and pull Teferi away from the people that he's spending time with, who he said showed him great hospitality.
Yeah.
And the line that they used, which I thought felt out of place in the story, or it felt confusing to me in the story until I thought about it, and then it was like, oh, this makes sense. The line says that the Cathars pulling him away, quote, provide him with exit from his hosts. Because the people that he was with were being so kind to him, but the Cathars showing up gave him a reason to have to leave. But the way that they put it, provide him with exit from his hosts. Oh, you mean like what Ren did with 6, like 2 paragraphs ago.
Right.
So I think that's really awesome. And then it's, honestly, that's not the only time that happens in this story, where it's kind of referential in that way. There's also, when we get to the part of Ren teaching Teferi how to pull apart the spell, or take apart the spell, it literally says, she tells him that he can unmake it. Which Amy and I both thought of Anguished Unmaking, which is the removal spell and the final story beat from Eldritch Moon.
Right.
When, or maybe it was Shadows of Innistrad, one of the two, where Soren decides that he actually has to kill Avacyn, or destroy Avacyn, however you want to put that. And again, now that we're back on Innistrad, that is what everyone is, at least from the story that we read last week, right? In part 1, or episode 1 of the main story, that's what the people of Innistrad are now dealing with, is mourning the loss of Avacyn, but also dealing with what that means for the growing werewolf and vampire and zombie populations, and what that means for the humans who Avacyn used to protect.
Right.
So, so I appreciated those, like, pseudo callbacks in the story itself being used to, like, you know, jog your memory, so to speak. I liked that. And so then we get to kind of the big climactic-ish portion where Teferi attempts to cast a spell. It doesn't work. And Ren, as I said, kind of talks to him about unmaking the spell and fixing it. Because there's like time stuff kind of in the air, like time spells or whatever in the air, kind of messing it up because it didn't work. And to Teferi, he's like, oh, well, I guess I just screwed it up. And Ren is trying to explain to him, look, this is how you would do it and pull it apart and stuff. I know that you really liked this part a lot. I think, at least I'd like to think that this was...
Yeah, it's really cool, because obviously it's very flavorful that Teferi would fuck up a spell. And not understand how to fix it.
Yeah.
Right, and so this is like his moment where somebody who can see the big picture from the outside can say to him, no, this is the way it is, right? And he can understand the intricacies of things that were too complicated for him to understand before. You know, and they mentioned Sulfur.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's foreshadowing that he's going to be able to figure out how to get Zulfir back.
Well, he even says, you know, when you get your new partner, we can go together. And she's like, whoa, hold on. And he's like, oh, right, you're right. I'm so sorry. So, yeah, but she had to be there to power him, so to speak, and help him out that way. So, yes, maybe that would be kind of cool.
Like, give him extra energy as well as teach him how to go about doing it.
Well, it was for him to touch that spell hurt him. For him to try to interact with it in any way. And her point was that his roots weren't engaged enough. And so she was able to help him root in so that he would be able to gain access to manipulating that spell to try to remove the issues with it, which I loved the description here of that act, where it was like he was able to look in and find what was wrong with it in a spot that he would have never looked, even in if he were to go over the spell 100 times.
Right.
It would never have been something that he would have looked into if not for Ren kind of pointing it out to him, and then he was able to see it.
Right.
So I thought that was great.
That's why I say, like, from her perspective, you know, she can look at it as a whole and find the problem in it in a way that he can't because he's too close to it, right?
Right.
And I really liked the fact that they said that his roots weren't deep enough.
Yeah.
Because one of the great ways to do trauma work, and really any type of like working on mental health stuff, is learning how to be more grounded, right? And even if it's not all the time, you can't do trauma work unless you're in a state where you can be in the moment, connected to the world that's around you, that's actually around you. Because when you're doing trauma work, you're accessing memory, right? And without that grounding to get you to a place where you know you can be safe, and calm and collected, you can't do the trauma work, because you get in that memory and you're just in it.
Right.
And then your body reacts the way your body reacts in those situations. So, you know, you shut down, or your adrenaline is through the roof, or you're trying to run and get away, or, you know, whatever it is, whatever your trauma response is to those traumatic things that you're reliving in those moments. If you can be grounded and calm and cool and collected and like in a meditative state prior to accessing those memories, it helps you come back out of it, kind of like Inception.
Okay.
Right.
To come out of the dream within the dream kind of a thing.
Where Leo has the top, right? You need the totem to get back out of it. Because what you're in may have been real, but it's not actually happening.
Right.
At the moment that you're in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. I like that. And then the story kind of culminates with. This is not. I try to figure out the best way to talk about stuff like this. I was able to figure this out, and I don't in any way purport to be like, you know, amazing at this kind of thing. Nor am I sitting here to boost my own ego, where I'm like, I figured it out, and then they told me about it, and I didn't want... But there was the part in the story where they get to the discussion where Teferi, Ren thanks Teferi when Ren finds Seven. And she says, thank you, without you I would not have found Seven. And Amy and I both like stopped and looked at each other and were like, yeah, but without Ren, Teferi would have never been able to fix the spell in the first place and know that that was something that he could even do at all. And the line that you really appreciated, do you want to read it or you want me to read it?
I don't know what you're talking about.
This line. Do you want me to read it or you want to read it?
I mean, I don't want to read it in reference to what we're talking about now.
Okay. So then, but I liked that Teferi was that dichotomy between those two characters. One thanking the other, and the other being like, "No, you don't understand. I also couldn't have done what I did without you." And so it's just that perfect marriage of those two being together and being exactly what the other one needed in that moment, and getting them both where they needed to be, which, whether you call that right place, right time, destiny, whatever the case may be, but I really liked that.
Yeah, I cried for a minute when we were reading that because I just said she could not have had her tree without Teferi messing with time.
Yeah.
Because her tree was a sapling. That was her tree, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't yet her tree.
Right. That's why it was. At least that I interpret it as that. Why it was. That's why the song was so quiet. Was because it was from a sapling, not from a tree that she was able to access. And so, yeah.
But I mean, that was her tree.
Yeah.
It was the one that was singing to her.
Right.
But it wasn't. The tree wasn't old enough yet. So it wasn't. It was the right tree, but it wasn't time for the tree.
Yeah.
So, you know, destiny being what it is, she happened to be with a time mage at the time that she found it.
Yeah.
So that the tree could be what she needed the tree to be.
And she happened to have the knowledge needed to fix the time spell that the time mage cast to allow her to be there as well. Right. So yeah, really cool, kind of across the board. So then how do you want to set this up? Because this was really important.
I just wanted you to write this line not in reference to the story, but just in reference to trauma.
Oh, okay. Great.
So it was a miracle and a mistake in the same moment is a more commonplace thing than you might think. So I just really liked that line.
It's very good.
Because it reminded me of when my therapist said that trauma work is like an archaeological dig. And you have to like dig away at the dirt and everything to like get to the artifacts, right? And I said to her, yeah, you're so scared to do the dig. Like, you're so scared to do the dig. But that's stupid. Because once you find those artifacts, they change everything. Right? So, like, think about an archaeological dig. And I mean, sure, there have been many artifacts found that were, you know, another clay pot or whatever. Right. But, I mean, think of archaeological digs where the artifact that was found changed the course of history.
Sure.
And so if you think of trauma work that way, your history is going to be forever changed by finding that artifact. Or I shouldn't say your history as much as your story, right? So your story going forward is going to be forever different because now you know what you didn't know, like Teferi, right? Something that you like to say all the time. You don't know what you don't know.
It's true. It's true. And how could you?
Right. So you need someone to help you.
Yeah.
Figure out what it is you don't know.
Right.
And then once you know what you don't know, then you can learn it.
Yep. And hopefully do it properly as well. Like take the time and learn it for real. Yeah. Give it the time that it deserves, so to speak. I know. If you have more, please continue.
Sorry.
Don't be.
Yeah, so the way it relates back to that line is just, the miracle is the finding the artifact, right? And the
Mistake.
The mistake is the fear that you can't do it.
Sure.
Right? Or that it's too hard, or it's too scary, or it's too dangerous, right? That fear that holds you back from being able to find those things that you need to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I would even relate that line. It's got many applications. And if you have a particular thing that it makes you think of, as always, we would love to hear it in the comments. That's super important. The thing that stands out to me about this line for me is, we've done grief work or volunteer work with grieving individuals as well. And something that when we first started doing the grief work, something that I heard that when I first heard it, I thought was a little insensitive. And I learned that I was very wrong because I didn't have the frame of reference for it. Was when someone who was sharing their experience with a loss of a loved one, they said that in doing that, in losing their loved one and in finding the organization that we were all a part of, again, us as volunteers, them as a recipient of the care that was being offered, what they said was, from something bad came something good. And at first, I incorrectly, I changed my mind from this feeling, I guess I should say,
Yeah.
that I felt that was insensitive at first when I heard it, until I actually unpacked it and realized what they were getting at when they said it, which is that they lost a loved one. It sucks, and they grieved that, and they will continue to grieve that continuously and or sporadically for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. That's just how it works. And yet what they said was, from something bad, that devastating loss for them and their family in their life,
that seemed like, or arguably that just is something you can't do anything about.
Correct. But it led to something good. Because they found that organization. They were able to receive the services from that organization. They were able to make new friends and new support systems. People that they could reach out to when they were having a tough time in their grief or in life in general. Because you just meet amazing people who really care.
Coping skills,
Exactly. And getting to come back year after year. And for this particular person that I'm thinking of, they then came back when they became old enough, after utilizing the services as a child and into adolescence. They then were able to come back as an adult and to give back even more as then a volunteer themselves, doing similar to what Amy and I were doing, but having even that much more experience working with the kids to say to them, no, I was there, I still am, but I was where you are now, and this was how it was for me. It's not necessarily how it'll be for you, but, and the whole idea of it is showing them that they're not alone, right? That when they go back to school and all the other kids are not that. They don't have, the kids don't have a frame of reference. Well, the other kids at this organization, the volunteers at this organization, they get it.
Right.
And so these kids don't have to feel like they kind of can't talk about it, or they shouldn't, or people won't understand, or they'll be made fun of, or all these other things. And so a miracle and a mistake in the same moment, right? While someone's death can be accidental, that's not what I mean, but just the idea of from something bad can come something good. So,
like losing a family member, but acquiring this whole family of people who get it.
Yeah. So that you have those coping skills. You have the ability to know that it can be okay. That it's not, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. And that there are ways to not move past it, but to move with it and live with it as you have to continue living your life.
Right.
Whether
it becomes part of you and you keep going.
And it's part, as you said, it's part of your story at that point as well.
Right. And it's not you trying to survive and move forward in spite of it. You know, it's you moving forward past the point where you can't move forward from it.
Right.
So like something so devastating happens to you and there's that moment where you can't move forward. You're just stuck. You're in that grief and it's too deep for you to climb out. But that doesn't last forever, you know. It's, you know, and then being in that community of people who have been there, you know, teaches you how to get out of that depth of grief.
Yeah.
So that you can continue to move on and still be yourself and still think of your loved one and still do things that you enjoyed doing with them as a way to remember them, as opposed to like every little thing that reminds you of them just makes you angry and you can't deal with it. And that's just the end, and that's your life now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a way to learn how to process it.
Yep. And then kind of moving away from that, the last thing that I wanted to talk about with this story is kind of going back to magic lore itself. Something that I had questions about with this story, but also praise for, was talking about, you mentioned the mending earlier. And there was a dividing line. Mm-hmm. There was pre-mending and post-mending, right? And that at that line, any planeswalker who got their spark after that point, they only know that. They only know their powers and their abilities post-mending.
Right.
With these restrictions. But pre-mending, those planeswalkers that existed pre-mending that still exist post-mending, there's a lot for them. There was a lot for them to have to cope with from basically losing godhood, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, Nicol Bolas did, Liliana. I mean, they've referenced it so many times in these stories.
Right. And so what I appreciate is Teferi is an old walker. Teferi is a planeswalker from pre-mending. Now, to be fair, he didn't have his spark for a very long time.
Yeah.
And he only just recently got it back. And so maybe that's why, maybe that's the rationale that they're giving. But I appreciate what is being done here, at least what I'm seeing being done here. Ren is possibly young. I don't know Dryad's ages. I don't know if Ren is an old walker or not. I really don't. But considering, I would say that because Ren is only on tree number 7, I would assume that they are not an old walker.
Probably not.
But I can imagine the majority, if not the supermajority or the entirety, of the old walkers that we have met who exist now post-mending, I don't know that any of them would have been so willing to take that advice that Ren had to give to Teferi the way that Teferi did in this story.
Yeah.
It feels like... It feels very out of character for an old walker, and yet I'm still not comfortable saying it's a retcon, because we haven't seen this Teferi, newly sparked in the post-mending world, interact in that way. So he was humbled for such a long period of time, and he was consistently reminded of his failure with Zalfir, and now he has his spark back and he can go to other planes, and one of the first things he did was join the Gatewatch and all these other things. And so I like what Teferi has become, or is becoming, because think about... Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely... He's humble.
Yeah.
In a way that probably a lot of the other ones are not.
Exactly. Well, I wrote a list of some of the ones that we've seen in stories recently. And by, again, recently, maybe past 5-6 years or whatever. Like you said, Nicol Bolas.
Okay.
Think about Ugin. And the interactions that Ugin has had with Jace. Younger planeswalkers than he, who he just shows up and says, well, this is the plan, this is what we're doing. And they're like, okay, could you... explain it to me, because we have other ideas.
Who the hell even are you?
Right. And Ugin's like, well, no, because your ideas are going to be dumb. I've thought of this consistently enough and sufficiently enough, so I'm better
old,
than you.
So I get it.
Yeah.
You're young, so you don't get it. So moving on. We're doing what I say.
Speaking of Ugin, sort of, think of Azor. When we met Azor in the Rivals of Ixalan stories. Amy mentioned Liliana.
Yeah.
Technically, Nahiri. In Zendikar Rising, she didn't listen to Jace, she didn't listen to Nissa, she didn't listen to anyone.
Yeah, but that's because she listened to Soren, and where did it get her?
And speaking of which, Soren.
Yeah.
These are all old walkers who now have to live in a post-mending world, and of all of them that we've mentioned, Bolas, Ugin, Azor, Lily, Soren, and Nahiri, and then there's Teferi. And how Teferi has been acting here.
Right. It's such a contrast.
Massive difference. Massive difference.
And maybe that is due, like you said, to him having lost his spark for a while.
Yeah. It's...
and that guilt from
Right.
from messing up the dealie of what he was trying to do with Zalfir.
Right.
You know? And the rest of them, I guess, just kept... Their heads just kept getting heavier and bigger and bigger and bigger until they fell over.
Right. Well, and because, I mean, the classic thing with the old walkers is they remember their old power, so they feel unbeatable because they used to have that old power. Teferi was already brought low.
Right.
He didn't need a reminder post-mending of, hey, by the way, pal, you ain't perfect anymore.
Right.
He got that reminder every single day that he was on Dominaria without his spark, hiding out so that nobody would see him and be like, oh, you're that guy who screwed with Zalfir. I have family in there. What the hell is wrong with you? He also has family in there. He doesn't need to be reminded of that because he reminds himself of it every day. So that's my take on it in terms of like why, but I just love that that seems to be the direction that they're going, because if they're leaning on Teferi as their primary blue mage these days over Jace, this is a great way to do it.
Yeah.
Great way to do it. So I appreciated it. It was definitely something that I wanted to talk about. Because, like, at first in this story, it was like, Teferi's, like, botching spells here and there. I'm like, this dude's an old walker. Like, sure, he doesn't have those powers, I get it. But at the same time, like, couldn't you figure this out? But again, one, it's a new plane that he's literally never been to before. In Innistrad. It's, and he has been without his spark for so long, like, doing these spells, whether it is rust of having not done them for such a long time, or at least not at this power level, now that his spark is back? Or does it have to do with his own trepidation? Listen, I screwed this up once. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this again, but here it goes. Here goes nothing. And his lack of confidence in himself leads to him screwing it up.
Okay.
Or some combination thereof, right? And
I think of it in a very different way.
Sure, please.
So, when I think of old walkers, I think of daycare. Toddlers in daycare with no adult in the room.
Okay.
It's not... They have too much power. They don't know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing smart is happening. It's just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And then post-mending, there is an adult in the room.
Yeah. Okay. The rules
Right.
come back, yeah.
Right. There are boundaries set. And when those boundaries exist, they know what to do. So, Teferi and all the other old walkers are scattered. They don't know what to do. Because they don't have someone in the room saying, don't eat that paste.
Don't throw blocks at each other, or don't whatever.
Right.
And it's actually, it's funny that you bring that analogy up, because saying that like Teferi is the kid who's like sitting there quietly waiting for the adult to return, whereas like all the other old walkers are running around being bastards and whatever. Because Teferi was the character, to my knowledge, I could be wrong on this, but I'm like pretty certain, Teferi is the character depicted on the card Disruptive Student. So, yeah, or mischievous
I'm not
student.
thinking of him as being any better than any of the rest of them.
You're not?
No.
After this?
No, he's messing up the spells.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And,
So Ren is the adult
He
coming back.
disappeared,
Okay.
Zalfir. It's just gone.
Sure.
He doesn't know where it is.
Well, he knows where it is. It's just phased out of existence. He has to be able to bring it back.
These kids aren't bad.
Yeah.
They just don't know what to do. Because there's nobody in the room.
Okay. Okay.
Except other toddlers who are just as chaotic as the rest of them.
Right. Okay. I like that a lot. Which analogy do you prefer? Leave it in the comments. That's really good. I like that a lot. So
those are the way, like, using that analogy is like the best way that I can like be kind of okay with Liliana, kind of okay with Soren, kind of okay with Nicobolus. Like, the stuff that they've done is so bad. But it's only their fault to a point. That point is really high. But it is to a point.
Sure.
Right? There's like this little amount that's not their fault because there was nobody in the room.
So good. Very, very funny. I appreciate it a lot. So, hey everybody, that's the end of this particular story. Please don't forget, we will be back next week with main story, or regular, main story, episode 2. So definitely stay tuned for that. We're looking forward to it. We hope you are as well. And also, by the way, this video is coming out on Thursday. If you were unaware, the day after this video comes out is pre-release for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Now, whether you are able to safely get out to a paper pre-release near you or not, and if you do so, taking as many precautions as you can, please, because as always, we want you to continue to stay safe and happy and healthy. That is incredibly important to us, and we appreciate it. And so for those of you who are saying, look, I want to go so badly, but I can't. I can't justify it, or the safety protocols aren't what I want them to be, whatever the case may be. Tomorrow night.
Understandable.
Right. Tomorrow night, again, this video coming out on Thursday. Tomorrow night, Friday, we are going we feel safe to do so, and we are comfortable with the store that we are going to and their safety measures as well. And we are going to be getting product and opening product for all of you.
Yes.
And so definitely stay tuned to the channel. As I said at the top, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. You'll get the notification as soon as the video comes out, because I can't promise you when it's coming, because we have to film it and edit it and upload it and all that fun stuff. Welcome to the club. But we will try to get it out to you as soon as we can, hopefully before like 10 p.m. Eastern. But otherwise I can't make any kinds of promises whatsoever. It all has to do with the speed of the machines that we're using and the time that we, I want to make sure that we get all the footage that we need beforehand. So, but definitely stay tuned to this channel for that. Because of that, if you were curious and you were unaware, we will not be streaming this Friday here on this channel. But otherwise, we stream every Monday and Friday right here, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, ringing that bell, you'll get notifications when we go live. And this Monday will be our first opportunity playing Innistrad Midnight Hunt on MTG Arena live, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, like I said. So definitely be here for that. And then next Friday, when we don't have a pre-release, we will be back for more video games on Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, where we will be finishing Avengers, or Marvel's Avengers War for Wakanda expansion.
Yes.
So thank you all so very much for watching. Definitely stay tuned for all the amazing things that we have coming out on this channel. We also have other channels linked down in the description box below. So check those out as well. Don't forget to subscribe and ring those bells as well. If you watched this, and you watched it all the way through, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And if at the end of this you're thinking of little baby Liliana and Nicol Bolas and Ugin running around throwing poop at each other, being in the Rugrats or whatnot, Ugin having, or Nicol Bolas, I guess, having his little screwdriver in his diaper that he can use to break out of the playpen. That is a great way to have joined us today in showing off our...
#VorthosPride.
It's the best way we've done it so far. I can't imagine a better way. But we're going to try it. So definitely stay tuned for more next week and in the weeks to come.
Oh my god, I want fan art so bad for that.
If you're that type of person, you go right ahead. We would love it.
Rugrat, old school planeswalkers. All the OGs.
The names we came up with were Bolas, Ugin, Azor, Lily, Sorin, and Nahiri, and Teferi, I guess. You do you with any others that you want to add in. Artistic license, obviously, to you. But...
oh my god. Like, Urza's head.
Urza's head. Sure. Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay.
That's that would be the headmaster.
Yeah, that would be the teacher that's not in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So, thank you all once again, and for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Mimi.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.